right. All right. Ooh, my voice today. OG Roz here. Keefe D trial, day 1. This is the complete master recap. So we're going to go over opening statements, the old police interview, Keefe D's words, witness testimony, and of course, we're going to bring in the Word of God. Going to refer to Proverbs chapter 24. Because that's what really matters here, is that lead others to Christ so that you can transform into a butterfly like the Lord has done for me. I am OG Roz and the butterfly. I am a Christian with attitude, an attitude for what is right. I stand firm in my beliefs. All right. So what is up, everyone? Everybody, it's OG Roz, and we have officially reached the end of day 1 of testimony in the Duane Keefe D. Davis murder trial involving the 1996 killing of Tupac Shakur. And I'm going to take this one from the beginning of court all the way to the end because a lot happened today. So we heard the prosecution's opening statements and we heard the defense's opening statement. The jury was shown the MGM grand fight. And then we heard portions of Keefe D's old conversations with investigators. We heard an interview connected to the investigation of Biggie Small's murder. We heard testimony taking us back to the streets of Las Vegas on September 7th, 1996. And most importantly, we're finally beginning to see what evidence prosecutors believe connects Keefe D to Tupac's murder, and how the defense intends to tear that evidence apart. So before we start, remember, Keefe D has pleaded not guilty, and he is presumed innocent unless and until the state of Nevada proves his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And also, this isn't Tupac's trial. This is Keefe D's trial for the murder of Tupac Shakur. All right, so let's go back to the beginning of day one. Now, earlier I posted a video, which was the first video that I posted. It's not that long. Feel free to go back and watch it. I had a little hiccup at the beginning. My dog vomited on me, y'all, as I was beginning to start the video. Well, he didn't get it on me. He was behind me. And I just felt this jerking, squeezing motion. And I'm like, what is going on? And I turned around and I looked and I saw like something, I don't want to describe it. And I could clearly see it was vomit. I'm like, oh no, he got it on my couch. So I had to get him in a isolated location, and I had to run to the bathroom and try to clean it up. And then I almost gagged. But anyway, I did. So go ahead and check out that video as well. That was the video I did before they were, the judge dismissed everybody for lunch break, okay? But if you choose not to, I am going to do a recap right here. So the jury enters and the case finally begins. So after nearly 30 years, a jury finally sat down in the Las Vegas courtroom to hear a murder case concerning the death of Tupac Shakur. The prosecution's case is not that Keefe D personally fired the bullets that killed Tupac. That's extremely important to realize and to remind yourself. The state's theory is that Keefe D participated in the planning and facilitating the retaliatory attack. So as we follow this trial, don't get stuck on one question. Can they prove Keefe D was the shooter? They aren't saying he was. The real question is, can they prove Keefe D knowingly helped make this murder happen? Okay, so the prosecution's opening statement is about revenge. Chief Deputy District Attorney Banu the state's opening statement, and prosecutors gave this jury a motive immediately: revenge. They took the jury back to September 7, 1996. Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight had attended the Mike Tyson fight at the MGM Grand. After the fight, Tupac and members of the Death Row entourage encountered Orlando "Baby Lane" Anderson. Orlando was Keefe D's nephew. The confrontation turned violent. The jury was shown surveillance footage of Tupac and members of the entourage attacking Orlando inside the MGM Grand. According to prosecutors, that beating changed everything. Their theory is that Keefe D and others wanted retaliation, and prosecutors say Keefe D made sure the people seeking revenge were armed and ready. Hours later, a white Cadillac pulled alongside the black BMW carrying Tupac and Suge Knight. Shots were fired. Tupac was struck. Died 6 days later, and prosecutors said he talked to investigators, he talked publicly, he participated in interviews, and he eventually wrote about the events in a book. So the prosecution essentially told his jury, you don't have to take our words for what Keefe D did. Listen to Keefe D. That's going to be a major theme throughout this trial. Okay, now the defense's opening remarks were, is there proof? Then defense attorney Michael Sant, and I apologize, I don't know how to pronounce his name, but Michael Sant got his opportunity, and the defense immediately attacked the state's entire foundation. Their basic position is Keefe D talked, but talking isn't the same thing as proof. The defense says Keefe D exaggerated, embellished, and even fabricated stories. Sorry, I'm pushing something here. Come on, keep it going. All right. Okay, I gotta have something in the background playing. Could you please play? And keep it that way. All right, so the defense says Keefe D exaggerated and embellished and even fabricated stories. They want the jury asking, where is the physical evidence? Where is the forensic evidence? Where is the murder weapon? Who can independently place Keefe D inside that Cadillac? Who can independently verify that Keefe D supplied the gun? And why did it take nearly 30 years to charge him? The defense characterized the prosecution's narrative as essentially fiction presented as fact. So right away we saw the battle line. The prosecution says, believe Keefe D's admission because he knew things an involved person would know. The defense says, don't believe Keefe D because Keefe D himself is an unreliable storyteller. So think about how unusual that is, right? So the defense may spend this trial trying to convince jurors, don't believe our client's own stories. Okay, then the old interview that caught my attention. So we get to the portion I was watching closely and taking screenshots of. So the jury heard an old recorded interview involving Keefe D, LAPD Detective Fred Miller, and Keefe D's attorney, Edie Mo-Fael, okay? And then it also said that Russell Poole was part of the interview. And here's where I want everybody to be careful. A substantial portion of this particular conversation concerned the investigation into the murder of Christopher Wallace, Biggie Smalls. So don't automatically assume every sentence heard in that recording was Keefe D confessing to something about Tupac, because it wasn't. That's important. But since they included it today for the jury to hear, that's why I'm talking about it. So this is not the proffer agreement. This interview is not about the proffer agreement. Okay. So what they discussed in the Biggie Smalls murder is what that interview was about. So during the interview, investigators questioned Keefe D about events surrounding Biggie's murder. The conversation included discussions of where people were, vehicles, and what Keefe D remembered hearing or seeing. And based on the portions we reviewed, Keefe D discussed being around events associated with the Soul Train Awards weekend. He discussed a green 1986 Cutlass. He discussed learning that Biggie had been shot. Investigators pressed him on details. At points, the conversation became tense. People talked over one another. Detective Miller challenged answers and pushed for clarification, and Keefe D's attorney intervened during portions of that questioning. Again, this portion was substantially about Biggie. So why is the Tupac jury hearing it? That's the question I immediately had. Because I expected them to focus on the proper agreement because that had to do with the Tupac case. But anyway, so why that old interview could matter in this trial? Well, the significance may not simply be what Keefe D said about Biggie. It may be how Keefe D communicated with investigators. The jury gets to hear him answering questions. So they get to hear when he remembers details. They get to hear when he says he doesn't remember. They get to hear investigators challenge him. And as additional recordings are introduced, jurors can compare those accounts. So that could potentially help prosecutors if they argue that certain details Keefe D later provided about Tupac were genuine. But it could also help the defense, because if Keefe D's story changed, if his timelines conflict, if investigators themselves appear uncertain, or if different interviews produce different versions, the defense can say, this is exactly why you can't convict somebody of murder based on Keefe D's storytelling. So I wouldn't call the Biggie portion a smoking gun against Keefe D in Tupac's murder, but I would call it context that may become more important once we hear the rest of the recordings. So the important distinction, interview versus proffer. There's a difference between it just an interview and a proffer. This is something I want my viewers to understand because I was initially sorting this out myself. Not every old police conversation we're hearing is necessarily the same thing as the later proffer. The later proffer agreement, okay? That has become so important in this case. Some of the material concerns the Biggie investigation. Other statements concern Tupac. Other statements came later. And Keefe D also subsequently spoke publicly. So as this trial continues, we're going to keep these categories separate because context matters. We need to know, when did Keefe D say it? Who was questioning him? What case were they investigating? What prosecution or what protections, if any, existed at the time? And did Keefe D later repeat the same information publicly? These distinctions could become extremely important. Okay, and then the jury hears Keefe D's own damaging words. The prosecution also introduced portions of Keefe D's previous statements concerning Tupac. One particularly striking statement involved Keefe D saying that if Tupac and Suge had been positioned on his side of the vehicle, he would have shot at them himself. And keep in mind, Suge and Keefe D were childhood friends. We're talking about like 8 years old, and then playing football together. And Keefe D going over to Suge's parents' house. But once you join the gang, it's like you all you think about is blood and sweat. You don't think about people, any type of relationship. You just become a beast. Now let's be legally careful though. That statement does not automatically prove Keefe D murdered Tupac. But imagine hearing that as a juror. The prosecution wants jurors thinking, why would an innocent person talk like this? The defense will likely respond because Keefe D was telling stories, exaggerating and building a reputation. And that's exactly why the jury has to hear all the evidence before deciding. Okay? Then, and then also there were recordings of Keefe D being interviewed on YouTube. And he just had this anger even after 28 years. He had that intense anger and seems like hatred toward Tupac. But that doesn't mean that he killed Tupac. He could still be, and it doesn't mean it, but it still could mean that he lied and told a story. But then, my thought was, he don't look like he's lying to me. He looked like he's saying them words with passion, like he means it, But at the same time, what is a fact is Tupac and his entourage beat up and attacked Orlando Anderson. Now that there is a fact, and that is on camera. So his anger I'm sure that is genuine when it comes to that, because that happened. Everything else is a question mark. Okay, so the first witnesses take us back to 1996. After opening statements and the recorded material, prosecutors began building the historical timeline. And one of the witnesses was retired Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Officer Gary Dale. And Dale has a unique connection to Tupac's final night. Before Tupac was shot, police stopped the BMW carrying Tupac and Suge Knight because of an issue involving the vehicle's license plate. They were eventually allowed to continue. Think about that timeline, okay? Police encountered Tupac alive. A short time later, everything changed. And this was a motorcycle cop. So, after the shooting, Dale's testimony then moved into the aftermath. Tupac had been shot. Suge had been wounded. Emergency responders and police were trying to understand what happened. Tupac was still alive. Police attempted to obtain information from him, but Tupac did not provide police with the identity of his attacker. That is significant historically. Okay? I think he was probably sticking to the street code. But again, it does not tell us who was inside the Cadillac. It establishes part of the immediate aftermath. Retired Detective Brent Becker. The prosecution also called retired Las Vegas homicide detective Brent Becker. Becker worked on the original investigation, and this is where the white Cadillac becomes extremely important. Witnesses reported seeing a white Cadillac pull alongside Tupac and Shug's BMW. Gunfire came from that vehicle, but the accounts were not identical. Witness estimates varied regarding how many people were inside the Cadillac. Some accounts described approximately 2 to 4 occupants, and that is something the defense may eventually use. Because if prosecutors say 4 particular men were inside that car, the defense can examine every original eyewitness statement and ask, did the people who were actually there see 4 men? Could they identify Keefe D? Could they identify Orlando? Could they identify anybody? That's going to matter. Now, the corroboration test. And that brings me to what I believe is the single biggest issue coming out of day one: the corroboration. Keefe D has said a lot, but what evidence independently confirms what he said? For every major Keefe D statement, I'm going to ask, who else confirms this? If Keefe D says he was inside the Cadillac, who saw him? If Keefe D says he supplied the gun, who can corroborate that? The only person I know of would be Zip and Foxy Brown. If Keefe D identifies the occupants, what evidence independently puts those people inside that vehicle? If Keefe D describes the shooting, does his description match what witnesses told police back in 1996? That is where I think this trial may ultimately be won or lost. And my question is, why didn't they interview these people a long time ago? So, what helped the prosecution today? In my opinion, the prosecution gained several things on day one. First, motive. The MGM Grand video gives jurors a concrete event immediately preceding the killing. Second, Keefe D's own statements. They don't have to manufacture those statements. The jury can hear his voice. Third, the white Cadillac. That detail existed in the original investigation. Fourth, historical witnesses. Police testimony allows prosecutors to begin constructing the timeline from 1996 forward, but the prosecutors still have a long way to go. Okay, so what helped the defense? The defense also has material to work with. This case is almost 30 years old. Memories fade. Some witnesses are dead. Some evidence is unavailable. Witness descriptions weren't necessarily identical. And most importantly, Keefe D has told multiple stories over many years. If the defense can demonstrate significant contradictions, they can argue. How can you convict somebody beyond a reasonable doubt when your central source is somebody whose own stories can't be trusted? And remember, the defense doesn't have to solve Tupac's murder. They have to create reasonable doubt about Keefe D's guilt. So, what did not get answered today? We still don't know. Will Suge Knight actually testify? Will somebody independently place Keefe D inside that Cadillac? Will prosecutors produce somebody who saw Keefe D with the murder weapon? And what will Tupac's family testify about? Will Mopreme Shakur take the stand? What other historical statements will be admitted? How much more of Keefe D's police interview will this jury hear? And what happens when the defense starts attacking those statements one by one? So day one gave us the framework. It did not give us the final answer. So if I had to summarize day one, it would be that the prosecution wants Keefe D's own words to convict him, while the defense wants Keefe D's reputation for storytelling to save him. And the question becomes, which part of those words can actually be corroborated? That is what I'm watching going into day two. Okay, and one thing they forgot to talk about is the woman they got on the stand. Oh, I forget her first name. Her last name was Stokes. She was one of the passengers in the vehicle. Now, I think I mentioned this in the previous video, so go check it out so I don't have to repeat myself. But one of the women that was in the vehicle, the night Tupac, she was not in the vehicle with Tupac. She was in the vehicle pulling up beside Tupac and Suge. And they were speaking to Suge because they knew Suge. And they were going to the club, the 662 club, and they were there talking when they heard the gunshots. So you can see that almost every documentary, every movie about the Tupac story and murder, they all show the girls saying Tupac, Tupac, and Tupac waving all outside the car. But this lady, she said that he wasn't doing that, and they weren't yelling Tupac, Tupac. She said that they turned, and her friend is the one that knows Suge, and she was trying to speak to him, and Tupac was just sitting there calm. Now, that sounds weird to me. Although, what would be her reason to lie about such a small detail, other than for her to lie to make it seem as if Keefe D was exaggerating and not telling the truth. But I don't see how in the world this girl could pull up next to one of the biggest stars, okay, during that time, and just ignore him like he ain't there, and just talk over him to talk to Suge Knight. Like, something sounds wrong with that story. And you must like that kind of music if you're talking about going to Club 662. So I don't know if she's been paid or threatened or what, but Even though the documentaries and everything portray the women as yelling out Tupac and Tupac waving outside the car the way Keefe D said he was, that sounds more like the Tupac that I know. So what do you think about that? Leave a comment. Now I'm going to give this a spiritual perspective. Also, the defense was they were also the direction they were going was trying to get the jurors to look elsewhere to potentially other people who could have had the motive to kill Tupac, like Reggie Wright and Death Row Records. You know, he's trying to point things in another direction. And so there would be the question of, well, who had the motive? Because there's other people who had a motive also. I thought that was kind of a smart move, to tell you the truth. But we'll see. So this in this on the spiritual perspective. Proverbs chapter 24. Check out some of my other videos because I am reading the whole book of Proverbs, one chapter at a time. And we are actually on chapter 24. So make sure you go check that out, okay? So now y'all know before we leave, we're going to bring this back to the Word of God. And today I want to go to Proverbs 24 because Proverbs 24 speaks about wisdom, justice, truth, and how we respond when another person falls. One of the lessons of this chapter is that we should not envy people who choose violence or desire their way. And when you look at this entire tragedy, think about how many lives were affected by violence. Tupac was 25 years old. Orlando Anderson later lost his life. Yaki Gaddafi lost his life. Biggie Smalls lost his life. Families were devastated. Communities were affected. And nearly 30 years later, we're sitting here watching another man's future being decided in a courtroom. What did all the violence accomplish? Nothing worth having. Proverbs 24 warns us not to celebrate when an enemy falls. And I think that's important for us following this trial. Whether you believe Keefe D is guilty or innocent, we don't have to celebrate somebody's destruction. We can desire justice without desiring vengeance. There's a difference. And Proverbs 24 teaches about rescuing those being led toward death and not pretending we didn't know. That reminds me that justice requires courage. If somebody truly knows something about a murder, there is a moral responsibility attached to that knowledge. But justice always requires truth. We cannot condemn somebody because we dislike them. We cannot convict somebody because of rumors. We cannot turn allegations into facts because they fit the story we already believe. That's why this courtroom process matters. And that's why I'm going to keep reminding everybody, listen to both sides. Listen to the prosecution, listen to the defense. Watch the witnesses. Compare the old statements Look for corroborations, look for contradictions, and then let the evidence speak. Because human justice can make mistakes, human memories can fail, people can lie, people can be bought, people can exaggerate, investigators can get things wrong. Some investigators are crooked. Think about the Rampart scandal that was going on in LA. Okay? Defendants can get things wrong. Witnesses can get things wrong. But God knows the truth. God knows exactly who was in that Cadillac. God knows who possessed that gun. God knows who fired it. And God knows who planned what. God knows what happened before the shooting. God knows what happened after the shooting. Nothing about September 7th, 1996 is a mystery to him. So what? Okay, because nothing is hidden from God's sight, right? So while this jury searches for truth through evidence, we pray that truth comes to light and justice is done correctly. Not vengeance, not entertainment, not rumors, justice. And with that, court has recessed for the day. Right? So that completes day one of the Keefe D trial. Tomorrow we're coming back for day two, and I am going to keep everything organized chronologically so we don't have to keep jumping backwards and repeating information. That's my goal. Okay. So the biggest thing I'm watching for tomorrow is, can prosecutors begin independently corroborating Keefe D's own statements? Because today we heard his words. Now I want to see the evidence that either backs those words up or tears them apart. This is OG Roz. If you're following this case with me, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and turn on your notifications, okay? And leave me a respectful comment. So after day one, who do you think had the stronger opening, the prosecution or the defense? And what evidence do you need to see before you make up your mind? Remember, we are following the evidence. We are not rushing to judgment. Okay? It doesn't matter if you are a Tupac fan, and it doesn't matter if you're not a Tupac fan. What matters is justice. Okay? God bless you, and I'll see you tomorrow for day two, Lord willing. All right.